less than 30 minutes.
Does it all.
Domino's Pizza delivers.
Taste right where you want it to be. Domino's Pizza delivers. One call does it all.
Watching is believing.
Homosexual and bisexual men.
The money approved today is to help cover Minnesota's battle against AIDS until April. But health officials say they plan to return to the state capitol early next year, seeking additional funding. Caroline Lowe, WCCO Television News in St. Paul.
Tonight, an AIDS victim who had refused to stop having sex has turned himself in at a Houston hospital. He is 30-year-old Fabian Bridges of Houston. During a recent interview with the WCCO television crew, he said he would continue having sex with strangers, even though he...
Keep Shabbos a kosher too, then you can learn like Pop did how to be.
Beirut, Lebanon.
The following program is broadcast in the public interest by KXLI St. Cloud. The views expressed are not necessarily those of KXLI's owners or management. No rebroadcast or other use of the following is permitted without the express written consent of KXLI.
Good morning and welcome to the Tri-County Journal. This week we're discussing AIDS, and joining us for this discussion, Dr. Roslyn Yomtovian, a pathologist at St. Cloud Hospital, also medical director of the hospital's blood bank. Dr. Yomtovian, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
The pathologists have been taken out of the basement of the hospital and brought out into the public light in the view of AIDS. First question we have to ask, what is AIDS? What is the acquired immune deficiency syndrome?
AIDS is a disease that disrupts a person's immunity. It is caused by a virus, a specific virus. It is transmitted predominantly sexually, so you can consider AIDS to be a venereal disease. It can also be transmitted by blood products, and sharing of needles.
How did it get to the United States? I understand it didn't start here.
It is believed to have come to the United States from Africa, Central Africa, brought to Haiti because of exchange of workers between Africa and Haiti in the 1970s, and ultimately picked up and brought to the United States predominantly by gay men who were vacationing in Haiti, and then returned the disease to primarily the coasts. And then, since the late 70s, it has spread throughout the United States.
This is a new disease, something which we didn't know about before?
It's believed in humans to be a new disease, and I say in humans because it is not clear whether this virus has been around for a fairly long time in animals. There are some people that believe a specific species of monkey has carried this virus for many years, but it only recently came from the monkey to the human. So yes, it is a new disease in humans.
Now, transmission of the disease, you mentioned earlier from the gay population, that's changing, isn't it? How is the disease transmitted?
Yes, it is changing. I should say that there's evidence that a prostitute in the United States was carrying this virus before the knowledge of this disease existed. This disease was not called AIDS until 1981. And there's evidence for the virus in a prostitute back in the mid-1970s. So I want to emphasize that there's nothing unique to gays so much that they were the ones who initially spread this disease. It was more or less an accident that it came into the gay population in this country. In Africa, this disease is equal in men and women. In this disease, it is obviously predominant in men because it's predominant in gay men at this point. Basically, it spreads sexually, so promiscuous sexual activities in the early going will spread this disease rapidly. And since there is a segment of the male gay population that is highly promiscuous, this is why it rapidly spread among the gays. Now, as time goes on, the disease will spread out of the very promiscuous groups. As soon as the number of people carrying the disease increases, the number of contacts an otherwise normal person would have to have with someone else becomes increasingly smaller as the number of carriers for this disease increases. And that is currently what is occurring. The disease is spreading from the gay men through mainly bisexual activity, some drug use into the heterosexual population, and also through blood products, of course, predominantly the hemophiliacs. The disease is currently spreading in the heterosexual population.
So let's talk about the other ways you can get AIDS beyond sexual activity. You talked about hemophiliacs.
Correct. I want to emphasize that AIDS is primarily a venereal disease. This accounts for probably at least 70% of cases. The second important way is drug addicts that use needles, that share needles. I won't make a value judgment on drug addiction. If someone is a drug addict but takes a new needle each time, they will not get AIDS. So it's not the habit per se, it's the sharing of needles, and that group is about 17%, quite large. After that, you have much smaller numbers. In the early days, there were many Haitians involved. That number is now declining. They are not considered at particularly special risk for this disease anymore. So hemophiliacs would be your largest group of blood product users. Most hemophiliacs, 80 to 90%, have been infected by this virus. The reason is they use blood products that are pooled from as many as 20,000 donors. Now, if only one of the donors was a person who was carrying the AIDS virus, I'll call it the AIDS virus, even though that's not the technical name for it, but I think people will know what I mean. You could see that if one lot of this clotting substance is contaminated that many, many different people are using, you could see how this whole population can be quickly contaminated. So those three groups are really the majority of cases.
What about these frightening stories we've heard about saliva or tears carrying the virus from person to person?
So I think you have to make a distinction between what carries the virus and what is infectious. And I think this is what people, don't distinguish between. It certainly has been isolated in tears, and it has been isolated in saliva. But whether these are infectious, transmissible substances is either zero, no, completely, or so rare that to focus in on them is to take away from what's really critical in terms of transmission, and that is sexual relations, intercourse, and sharing of needles.
How long does it take for this disease to develop?
The disease has a very interesting clinical pattern. Once you're infected with the virus, there are now a couple of studies that demonstrate you experience an acute illness similar to infectious mononucleosis. You get symptoms of fatigue, malaise, you just don't feel good, feel washed out, maybe you get a fever, some of the lymph glands enlarge.
This is very quickly after infection?
Yes, this is about 2 weeks to a month, maybe a little sooner. That goes away, and following that, the person will feel completely well for an indefinite period of time, from a year to 2 years to 3 years to as long as perhaps 6 or 7 years. However, in this interval, they will be carrying the virus and are presumed to be infectious to other people. That's what is so frightening about this disease, that a perfectly healthy looking and feeling person can give this disease to another person. That is why the wives of hemophiliacs, some of them have acquired this disease, and why a mother who has acquired it from a husband who's a hemophiliac can transmit it to a baby. And this is what is happening now with this disease. It is why it is so frightening, because it is spreading in this manner to the regular, ordinary people.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, talk a little bit about what's called pre-AIDS, which you tell me is not used anymore. We'll be back to define that term right after these messages.
At issue, tax reform, unemployment, health and education, crime and punishment. When you need to know how today's issues will affect you tomorrow, turn to It's Your Business. Week after week, we put the hottest issues on the table. We bring you the movers, the shakers, and the headline makers. It's a freewheeling and revealing rundown of American opinion.
Hello, I'm Errol Comer. Join us this week as we confirm the facts and confront the issues. After all, you should know it's your business.
Get ready for a taste of the 1985 Montreux Golden Rose Rock Festival Volume 2.
War was to live and fevers to live.
community. That's why we offer more different sources of news than any other television station in Minnesota.
Each weekday, our coverage begins at 6 with ABC World News This Morning with Kathleen Sullivan.
Then at 7 a.m., it's BizNet News from Washington, D.C., news for business and the American consumer.
Monday through Friday at noon, CNN Headline News brings you up to date on late-breaking national and international affairs.
Throughout the pathologist and medical director of St. Cloud Hospital's blood bank, Dr. Roslyn Yomtovian, is here talking with us about AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. You told me before we got started today, pre-AIDS is a term no longer used?
Yes, because pre-AIDS implies that everyone with it will get AIDS, and that clearly is not known. I like to make an analogy between what they call pre-AIDS and someone who has angina, who has chest pains that are related to hardening of the arteries of the heart. Not everyone with angina will get a heart attack. It certainly is a risk factor. If you have angina, it's increasingly likely that you will suffer a heart attack, but it's by no means certain or guaranteed. And hence, with what used to be called pre-AIDS, if you have a certain milder form of illness related to infection with the virus that causes AIDS, you're certainly at a higher risk of ultimately developing AIDS. But how many of these people will go on to develop AIDS is not clear.
Do you see the problem increasing or decreasing now?
Oh, it's absolutely increasing. It's critical now to me. There are various estimates of the number of carriers of this virus to range between 1 and 2 million. I guess I believe it's probably closer to 2 million and spreading, because people are spreading this disease that don't know they have it. And
how do you find out if you're a carrier or if you have the disease?
Okay. Currently, there is a test available that is a marker for the virus. It's not a specific test for the virus. It's a test for an antibody related to the virus. The test is not perfect. This is a problem with it. There will be some people that have a positive test that don't have the virus. There will be some people that have a negative test that have the virus. So hopefully these numbers are small, but this is not resolved yet. But let us say that the majority of people will have a positive test, have the virus, and therefore they're infectious. They are testing blood now. They are offering this test to people in high-risk groups at alternate test sites. They currently have 2 of these that I'm aware of in Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Red Door Clinic and Room 111. They have a backlog of about 2 months. In other words, it takes 2 months to get an appointment at these places, so clearly...
Is it an involved test? Is that why it takes so long?
The test is simple, extremely simple, and even cheap. And it's inexpensive. It takes long because of the implications related to getting a positive test result. There's a lot of counseling involved in it. But the test is available. In the state of Minnesota, there are several labs that do run the test. We currently at the hospital send our tests to be done at the Red Cross in St. Paul. The reason we do that is not that we're not equipped to do that at the hospital. We feel that it would enhance confidentiality if we directed physicians in their offices instead of sending the tests to us, and therefore we would know who the person is that would have a positive result, to just send it directly to the test site. The less people that know about this, I think the less chance there will be for problems with personal freedom and infringements on civil liberties related to these test results. This is a whole other issue that is related to the medical disease AIDS.
Let's talk for a minute about some of the social problems here. We've heard stories about youngsters not being admitted to school, other youngsters admitted to school, depending on which state those youngsters reside in. I know you have young children. Is it safe to send your children to school with an AIDS victim?
I would send my children to school with an AIDS victim. I will not tell you that there's absolutely no chance that a child will not get AIDS from another child at school. I think would that happen, it would be limited to the ways we know it's transmitted, sexually and through blood. So what I'm saying is if a boy who carried the AIDS virus was hyperactive sexually and engaging in activities that were not proper for that particular person, yes, there would be.
Now listen. Now listen! Carefully! Now you're in trouble. There are some men that are on the way here that think that you're defenseless. They're going to kill you, and they're going to kill your wife, and they're going to kill your children. Now, you may not understand this, Mr. Girardi, but you...
have been infected by the disease or may be very concerned about preventing the disease. What are your guidelines or your advice on preventing problems?
Preventing the disease varies depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a stably married couple where there has been no promiscuity, and by promiscuity we unfortunately have to even talk about some activities, even rare activities with prostitutes within the last, say, 5 years. If a man, for example, has visited prostitutes without protection, for example, a condom, which is believed to cut down on the risk, there is a potential risk. It's probably not very high yet, but it is getting higher as time goes on. More and more prostitutes are being shown to be carriers of this virus. So I would say that one has to talk to each other if you're in a marital situation about your sexual activities. If there are any, is there any evidence of bisexuality, especially a man being homosexual sometimes? This would put the wife and the man, the husband, at a very high risk. And yes, these people should be tested. The way you can go about doing that in town is basically through your local physician at this point. If you prefer more confidentiality than that, you would have to call one of the alternate test site clinics in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I've said, unfortunately, there is about a 2-month wait, and you'd have to make the trip down to the cities. There will be other alternate test sites opening up in the near future. I don't know exactly where they'll be located geographically. That may help, but if time is of essence, the doctors in St. Cloud all have instructions on how to procure the specimens, and then they're sent to the Red Cross for testing. Results should be available within about 2 weeks' time.
Let's talk for just a minute about someone who needs a blood transfusion. We talked about hemophiliacs who routinely receive blood transfusions. What can you do to prevent your chances of getting AIDS if you know you have a transfusion coming?
Well, the first thing is not to take a blood transfusion unless you need it. Now, most of the time, that decision will be left to the doctor. But you certainly should talk to your doctor about the medical necessity of the blood transfusion. After that, there are a couple of alternatives. One of them, one large category, is what we call autologous transfusion, the possibility of receiving your own blood. Now, at St. Cloud Hospital, we've had a program in place since 1983. In fact, 8% of our transfusions this year have been pre-deposit autologous transfusions. People who come in before elective surgery, donate their own blood, anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 pints, get it back during surgery. Now, in cases of emergencies, this obviously wouldn't apply. There are other techniques which are potentially applicable, such as recycling blood that's being lost, bleeding in the operating room back into the body. There's very technical equipment involved in this, and it's only offered at a few generally larger institutions. In Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic would be the institution that has pioneered in this, and it's something that we've been looking into at St. Cloud Hospital. So I would say talk to your doctor about the possibility of getting your own blood. I would discourage what we call directed donations, getting your own family to donate for you. There are a lot of reasons for it, but in essence, we know that AIDS has spread far and wide, and there's simply no way of guaranteeing that family members are necessarily safer than the general population, and it also presents a lot of logistic problems. For example, we can't do that in St. Cloud. We're not licensed to do that. So you'd have to go to St. Paul to the Red Cross or Minneapolis to the Memorial Blood Center, and they are discouraging it. It's very cumbersome procedure, and they simply don't believe it's any safer.
We need to take a break here. I'd like to ask you a few more questions about that. I'd also like to ask you... Dr. Yomtovian is here answering some of our questions about AIDS. Dr. Yomtovian, we were talking earlier about blood donations. What if you're someone who routinely gives to a blood drive? What are the chances of you passing on blood with AIDS? Or how is that screened?
Okay. First, let me say, if you're a blood donor, there's no chance of, by you being a blood donor, that you'll get AIDS. Let us clear that up. People should go and donate blood. Blood banks need blood. There are always people in car accidents and so forth. They must have blood. So please continue to give blood. Now, yes, there will be people that are carriers that donate blood. This blood presumably will be identified when the blood bank, the blood center, the Red Cross performs this screening test that I talked about earlier. And that blood will be discarded. And the person will be notified if the results are confirmed by a more sophisticated test.
So all blood given in a blood drive is tested.
Correct.
In Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
What research is being done on AIDS?
Lots of research is being done on AIDS. I would divide this into the basic research in which people are working with test tubes and molecular biology and so on, and research that's more psychosocial. Unfortunately, the basic research is progressing rapidly. They've identified the virus. They know lots about it. Unfortunately, the application of this research, i.e. a vaccine or drugs to treat it, is simply not here yet. And it won't be for probably on the order of 5 years, anything really dramatic or significant. And, you know, money is needed, research must go on, but these things take time, they take talent, they take lots of advances made concordantly in many different fields of biology, and it simply won't happen overnight.
Just this week, we had a news story about a blood substitute being developed, and it had worked successfully in laboratory animals. Is that a possibility?
Blood substitute research has been going on for at least 10 years, probably more. There have even been clinical trials in patients, but none of the blood substitutes, including the most recent ones, will be ready for any type of formal clinical routine applications for, again, we're talking about a 5-year period or longer.
When you look at the AIDS problem overall, and people ask you questions, what one thing would you most like to tell people that they find the most reassuring, or you get asked the most?
That AIDS, although it's very fearful, and I must tell you, I fear this more than nuclear war, because nuclear war is only theoretical. AIDS is here. Although it's fearful, you can prevent it. You can prevent it by learning about it and learning about how not to get it. You must know who you're having sex with, and you must not share needles. And there is a small risk with blood. This will not completely go away, even with the blood test. So you should exercise care when you receive blood. But I wanted to comment again on the research. I said there is research on psychosocial aspects, and I would say that lots of money, probably more money, needs to be devoted to education of people, the general public, as to what AIDS is. Money must go into this because there will not be a medical cure or prevention in the short term. So people must be educated on this. With that in mind, I must compliment St. Cloud as a community that has really gotten its act together on this and can serve as a model for other communities. The hospital has had a program to educate the public on this. The St. Cloud Granite Rotary Service Club has been in the forefront of helping to coordinate several upcoming educational forums, symposiums, and so on the subject. And it's really only in this manner that this disease can be brought under control.
Where can people go for more information right here in St. Cloud? To the hospital?
In St. Cloud, well, I would say, well, they can call me if they have anything, you know, burning or specific that they want to talk about, or they can talk to their doctors. I think doctors are a good source of information on this. They can also call the Department of Health, the Minnesota Department of Health, who has an 800 number, an AIDS hotline, to ask questions. And finally, they could call one of the alternate test sites in Minneapolis or St. Paul with questions.
Dr. Yomtovian, thank you very much. I know we got you away from a very busy schedule. I appreciate all the help that you've given us here. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll be back again next Saturday morning with another edition of the Tri-County Journal. Have a pleasant weekend.
The preceding program was produced by the News and Public Affairs Departments at KXLI. Interested and responsible parties wishing to air differing and opposing views regarding the proceeding may write to KXLI-TV, Box 1776, St. Cloud, Minnesota 56302. Tapes of Tri-County Journal are available for viewing through the Great River Regional Library in downtown St. Cloud and through District 742 Media Services to schools.